The morning sun filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the small-town courthouse, casting long beams across the polished wooden benches. Outside, the streets were alive with murmurs of curiosity. This wasn't just any trial. This was the theft ring case that had gripped the entire county. Locals had been talking for weeks, filling coffee shops, libraries, and social media with speculation, theories, and gossip. The courthouse doors opened, and a slow stream of people began filing in. Journalists with notepads and cameras, neighbors eager to witness the drama firsthand, and a few family members who seemed tense and anxious. Inside the courtroom, there was a low hum of chatter, quickly silenced by the gavel, as the bailiff announced the start of proceedings. The judge, a tall man with graying hair and a calm, authoritative demeanor, took his seat. His eyes scanned the room, noting the anticipation and quiet excitement that filled the air. Today was not going to be an ordinary day in court. Today, a small but highly significant witness would make an appearance, though no one realized it yet. Emma sat in the front row, her tiny hand clutching her mother's tightly. At 3 years old, she was far too young to understand the legal jargon that would soon fill the room. But she seemed to possess a kind of awareness that went beyond her years. Her brown eyes scanned every person who entered, every movement, every sound, absorbing details that most adults overlooked. Her mother, Sarah, was nervous yet protective, unsure if this experience might frighten her daughter or perhaps reveal something unexpected. The trial was focused on a local theft ring that had eluded authorities for months. Jewelry stores, convenience stores, and even a small family-owned diner had reported suspicious activity. The suspects were cunning, using back alleys, secret drop-offs, and careful planning to avoid capture. Law enforcement had been struggling to tie all the evidence together, and the police dog Rex had become a central figure in tracking down key clues. His keen instincts had uncovered hidden compartments, sniffed out stolen items, and even alerted officers to suspects hiding in plain sight. Emma seemed strangely fascinated by all of it. While most children would be scared of the stern-faced officers, the judge, and the intimidating atmosphere of a courtroom, Emma's gaze was steady, almost analytical. She followed the comings and goings of attorneys with interest, noting the way they paused, leaned, and gestured, as though she were piecing together the story in her own tiny way. Her mother whispered gently, "Stay calm, sweetie. Just watch and hold my hand." Emma didn't speak, but her small nod indicated she understood. The prosecution began presenting their evidence. Photographs of stolen goods were passed around. Receipts were examined under magnifying glasses. The testimony of previous witnesses painted a picture of a carefully orchestrated series of crimes. Jurors listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, but even they seemed distracted by the unusual presence of a little girl in the front row. The public gallery was packed, and reporters shifted anxiously to get better angles for their cameras. No one had expected that a toddler could play any role in a serious trial, but Emma's quiet intensity made her an undeniable focus. There was a moment of stillness when the bailiff announced that Rex, the police dog, would enter the courtroom to demonstrate his role in the investigation. Whispers spread through the audience. A dog in court was unusual, but it was not unheard of. Still, no one anticipated the connection that would unfold between the dog and the tiny child sitting calmly in the front. Rex appeared, a large, sleek German shepherd with a shiny coat and alert, intelligent eyes. He walked with precise discipline beside his handler, his paws clicking on the wooden floor. The courtroom collectively leaned forward, some in curiosity, others in amusement. Dogs often helped police, but the intensity of Rex's presence was striking. He exuded an aura of focus, his gaze sweeping over every person and object in the room. Emma's eyes widened slightly, her small fingers tightening around her mother's hand. She did not look frightened. She looked aware. As Rex approached the front, Sarah whispered softly, "Do you see him?" Emma's head tilted slightly, and for the first time that morning, she spoke. Her voice was a mere whisper, but clear enough that her mother heard. "He knows." Sarah froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. She glanced around nervously, hoping no one had noticed. But the murmurs in the room made it clear that attention was already on Rex. The dog's ears twitched, and he seemed to recognize the small voice addressing him, though no one else understood the significance. The judge called the room to order, trying to maintain the courtroom's dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The trial will proceed." Yet even as the gavel sounded, the courtroom's energy had shifted. The tiniest participant, a 3-year-old, had spoken words that carried a weight no one anticipated. Lawyers glanced at each other, some intrigued, others skeptical. The jurors leaned forward, sensing that the unfolding drama might take an unexpected turn. Emma remained calm. She had observed enough in her brief life to know that the room was tense, that the adults around her were anxious, and that Rex, the police dog, was not just any animal. Her intuition, though mysterious, was precise. The courtroom had become a stage where even the smallest actor could influence events, and Emma was about to prove that truth often comes in surprising forms. As the prosecution continued to outline the case, highlighting stolen items and witness statements, Emma's gaze never left Rex. She tracked every movement of his head, every flick of his tail, every sniff he took. Her tiny brows furrowed in concentration, as though she were silently communicating with him. The tension in the room grew. Spectators felt it, jurors sensed it, even the attorneys seemed slightly unnerved. This was no ordinary trial anymore. Something extraordinary was about to happen. By the time the first witness was called, Emma had already noticed a subtle pattern that others overlooked. She watched how Rex reacted to the witnesses, how his body tensed slightly when certain names were mentioned, and how he leaned subtly toward certain pieces of evidence. While adults debated legal strategies and procedural technicalities, a toddler's quiet observation had begun connecting dots no one else could see. The courtroom remained still, except for the quiet murmurs and scribbling of notes. Emma's presence, her quiet confidence, and the looming presence of Rex created a unique energy, a mix of anticipation, curiosity, and unspoken tension. Everyone sensed, even if unconsciously, that the events of this trial might hinge on something far smaller, far subtler than the charts, photographs, or testimonies filling the courtroom. As the first part of the day's proceedings drew to a close, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Emma's eyes followed Rex, her small hand occasionally twitching as if wanting to point something out. Sarah whispered again, more insistently this time, "Be careful, sweetie. Just watch." Emma nodded once, resolute. The quiet before the storm was palpable. Everyone in that courtroom, judge, jurors, attorneys, and spectators, felt it. Something was about to happen, something that would stop the room in its tracks and prove that even the smallest voice could hold the power to change everything. And so, as the morning sun shifted across the courtroom's wooden floors, casting shadows over the benches and spectators, the stage was set. A 3-year-old girl and a police dog had silently prepared to reveal a truth that no one, not even the adults in charge, could have predicted. The quiet had its own weight, and it would soon break in a way that would leave the courtroom frozen in disbelief. The courtroom had quieted after the morning proceedings, but the tension remained thick in the air. Everyone waited, eyes flicking between the judge, the lawyers, and the front row where Emma sat, her small hand firmly holding her mother's. Sarah could feel the weight of curious glances and hushed whispers from the spectators. She tried to keep Emma calm, but inside her heart raced. Today's proceedings were already unusual, and the next moment promised to be unforgettable. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened again, and in walked Rex, the police dog whose reputation had spread through the town long before the trial began. He was a sleek, muscular German shepherd with a glossy coat that gleamed under the morning light. His sharp eyes scanned the room carefully, ears twitching at every subtle sound. He was no ordinary dog trained to sniff out evidence, follow scents, and track suspects. Rex had already solved dozens of small-town mysteries. Today, however, he was about to step into the most unusual courtroom appearance of his career. The spectators instinctively leaned forward as Rex entered. His handler walked beside him, voice calm and commanding, giving subtle cues that the dog obeyed without hesitation. The sound of Rex's paws clicking against the polished wooden floor seemed louder than usual, echoing in the courtroom. People whispered among themselves, commenting on his size, his alertness, and the discipline evident in every movement. Some smiled, thinking a dog in court was a ceremonial gesture. Others felt a strange unease, sensing that Rex's presence meant the evidence would be scrutinized in a way they hadn't anticipated. Emma's eyes widened as she recognized him. She had never met Rex in person before, but something in her tiny mind clicked instantly. Perhaps it was his posture, the way he sniffed the air, or the subtle intelligence in his eyes. Whatever it was, Emma stiffened slightly, her small fingers clutching her mother's hand even tighter. She stared at Rex as though he were an old friend or a silent partner in some unseen game. Sarah leaned down and whispered softly, "Do you see him?" Emma nodded, but her response was more than a nod. Her brown eyes locked on Rex, and in a tiny voice, she whispered words that sent a shiver down her mother's spine. "He knows." Sarah froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. The courtroom continued its murmurs, but suddenly, everything seemed to slow down for her. She looked at her daughter, then back at Rex. The dog's ears perked up, and he gave a small tilt of his head, as if acknowledging Emma's words. It was impossible, surely. A toddler couldn't be reading a dog's mind, but the unspoken connection was undeniable. The judge called the room to order, trying to restore the formal atmosphere. "All rise. Court is in session." The gavel struck the polished wood, and everyone snapped to attention. But the energy in the room had already shifted. This was no longer just a trial about stolen items and suspects. This was a subtle, almost mystical interaction between a child and a dog that had captivated the attention of every adult present. The prosecution continued with their narrative, presenting photographs of stolen items, receipts, and witness statements. Emma, however, barely glanced at the papers. Her focus was entirely on Rex, following his every movement, his sniffing of the floor, the way he occasionally paused and lifted his nose to catch an invisible scent. Sarah noticed her daughter's intensity, marveling at how focused she seemed. "Sweetie, just watch," she whispered again, and Emma responded with a small nod. Rex approached the front of the courtroom, guided by his handler. His movements were precise, almost ceremonial. The dog stopped, ears raised, and tail lowered slightly, indicating alertness. Emma's eyes flickered with recognition. She pointed subtly with her tiny finger, not in fear, but with purpose. Her mother's heart pounded. Something told her that Emma understood far more than anyone realized. The spectators couldn't help but notice the unusual tension. Reporters quickly raised their cameras, snapping photos of the scene, a tiny girl pointing at a police dog in the middle of a serious trial. The courtroom held its collective breath. Lawyers exchanged glances, trying to maintain professionalism, but visibly distracted by the unusual spectacle. Even the jurors shifted in their seats, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Rex's handler knelt briefly, whispering to him, giving cues that only the dog could understand. Rex responded immediately, his body tense, alert, and focused. He sniffed around the front row, lingering near objects on the floor, occasionally glancing at Emma. It was as if the dog recognized her, or at least understood that she had noticed something critical. The courtroom atmosphere became electric, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and tension. Emma's lips moved again, softly this time, repeating the words that had set the stage earlier. He knows. The room went quieter still. The jurors leaned in, witnesses paused mid-sentence, and even the attorneys seemed momentarily distracted. A 3-year-old girl had spoken 2 words that commanded the attention of an entire courtroom. And the dog Rex reacted with a tilt of his head, ears flicked forward, eyes sharp, as if understanding something far beyond what humans could perceive. The prosecution tried to maintain control, continuing with questioning and exhibits, but the subtle connection between child and dog was impossible to ignore. Witnesses noticed Rex reacting differently when certain suspects' names were mentioned. The dog's instincts, combined with Emma's attention, hinted at truths that had not yet been revealed in testimony. The courtroom was slowly realizing that this wasn't a coincidence. Something extraordinary was unfolding. Even the judge seemed captivated. He leaned forward slightly, tapping his gavel lightly, acknowledging that while legal proceedings followed protocol, today was unlike any courtroom experience he had encountered. A toddler's quiet recognition had altered the energy, changed the focus, and introduced a new layer of tension. Every person present felt it, an almost electric awareness that something pivotal was about to happen. As the day progressed, Emma remained seated, quiet but intensely observant. She didn't speak unless prompted, but every subtle movement, tiny gestures, shifts of her eyes, slight nods, seemed to communicate a deeper understanding. Rex, too, continued to observe, his training and instincts intertwined with this mysterious bond. People whispered, speculating about the meaning behind her words and her focus. How could a toddler understand a dog like that? One juror whispered, "It's almost like she knows what the dog knows." By late morning, the trial had reached a point where the interactions between Emma and Rex could no longer be ignored. Lawyers began discussing the dog's role more openly, acknowledging that his instincts and actions might influence the interpretation of evidence. Witnesses were brought closer to Rex, objects were carefully presented, and the dog responded predictably, yet with a sense of judgment. And throughout it all, Emma's gaze never wavered. She was calm, patient, and precise, her small hands resting quietly in her lap when not pointing, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. Sarah watched, a mix of awe and anxiety churning in her chest. She had expected Emma to be a passive observer, a quiet presence in an adult-centered world. Instead, her daughter had become the focal point of the courtroom without even realizing it. The dog, trained to detect, track, and reveal, seemed to recognize her attention and react accordingly. It was as if they shared an unspoken understanding, a silent communication bridging innocence and instinct. By the time the lunch recess approached, the courtroom was buzzing with speculation. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Jurors whispered amongst themselves, and attorneys exchanged quiet, concerned glances. The first half of the trial had concluded without resolution, yet the energy in the room hinted that a revelation was imminent. Emma had not only observed, she had influenced the atmosphere, guiding the adults to notice what had previously gone unseen. The scene was set. A toddler, a police dog, and an entire courtroom held in suspense. Everyone, from the judge to the last spectator, sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen after the recess, a moment that would forever be remembered in this small town's history. Emma's quiet words, "He knows," had created ripples that promised to turn the trial on its head. The world outside the courtroom could never have imagined the power of a tiny voice and a trained dog. But inside, every eye was on the front row, every attention on the subtle connection forming between innocence and instinct. And so, as the noon sun shone brighter through the courtroom windows, the day's proceedings paused for recess. But the tension remained, lingering like an unspoken promise. The second half of the trial would not be ordinary, and the small observer in the front row, together with a loyal police dog, was about to change the course of justice forever. After lunch, the courtroom slowly filled again. The buzz of whispers was louder now, fueled by speculation about the morning's unusual events. Everyone remembered the tiny girl in the front row, clutching her mother's hand, and the police dog, Rex, whose presence had already commanded attention. No one could shake the memory of Emma's two whispered words. "He knows." That quiet phrase, spoken by a child barely 3 years old, had frozen the courtroom in awe and left reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. The judge called the session back to order. "Court will reconvene," he said firmly, though his voice carried a hint of curiosity. The jurors straightened in their seats, and lawyers prepared their notes. Even seasoned officers and detectives seemed alert, aware that something extraordinary had unfolded, and was likely to unfold further. Everyone's eyes drifted to the front row, to the small figure of Emma, who sat quietly, observing everything with unwavering focus. The prosecution resumed their questioning of witnesses, but the energy in the room had shifted. Their confident tone was tempered by a new tension and unspoken acknowledgement that the dog's behavior and the child's reaction might reveal unseen aspects of the case. Witnesses were more cautious, noting the subtle interactions between Emma and Rex, and some even glanced nervously at the young girl. It was as if her gaze, so intent and unwavering, could pierce through facades and uncover hidden truths. Emma remained composed, her expression calm but alert. She noticed everything: the angle of Rex's ears, the subtle twitch of his nose, and the way he paused near specific objects or certain individuals. While adults debated legal strategy and procedure, Emma's tiny mind quietly connected details. Her concentration seemed almost impossible for someone so young, yet there was no fear, no distraction, only a quiet intensity. Sarah whispered occasionally, urging her daughter to stay calm, but Emma's attention never wavered. Rex was brought forward again, this time for a more detailed demonstration. His handler allowed him to approach various exhibits, sniffing items related to the case: a stolen necklace, a wallet, and a small duffel bag. The dog's reactions were precise, his body tense when he recognized an object linked to the crime. Emma's eyes followed every movement, her small hands folded in her lap when not pointing subtly. Each time Rex indicated something significant, she gave a tiny nod, almost imperceptible, confirming the dog's instincts. The defense attorneys sensed an opportunity. They leaned forward, emphasizing the importance of Rex's reactions and Emma's recognition. "Your Honor," one attorney began cautiously, "we believe the observations of this child, in connection with Rex's demonstrated abilities, may shed new light on critical aspects of this case." The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded, allowing the defense to proceed. The courtroom murmured, intrigued by the unusual collaboration between a toddler and a police dog. Witnesses were recalled to the stand. The first was a store clerk who had witnessed one of the thefts. As he recounted the events, Rex shifted, his body alerting subtly to the suspect mentioned. Emma's eyes lit up, and she whispered softly to her mother, "He knows him." Sarah's breath caught, realizing that Emma had identified a key individual simply by watching the dog's instincts. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, everyone sensing that the child's observation was now entwined with the investigation. The next witness was a neighbor who had seen suspicious activity near one of the targeted locations. As they spoke, Rex's attention flicked to an object on the table, his nose twitching. Emma's finger moved slightly, pointing to the same object. The jurors exchanged glances, the significance slowly dawning on them. A 3-year-old had noticed details that adults had overlooked, and the dog's trained instincts corroborated her silent observations. The courtroom energy was electric. Anticipation hung in the air like a tangible fog. Reporters whispered amongst themselves, scribbling notes with rapid urgency. Cameras flashed intermittently, capturing images of the unlikely pair at the center of the courtroom drama. Even the seasoned officers in attendance seemed impressed, acknowledging that Rex's instincts, combined with Emma's awareness, were providing insights that the formal testimonies had yet to reveal. Lawyers on both sides adjusted their strategies, realizing that the courtroom dynamic had changed irrevocably. The defense pressed forward, asking the witness to identify items and describe behaviors while Rex observed. Each time the dog responded correctly, Emma's tiny nod confirmed the accuracy of his instincts. The room grew quieter with each exchange, the weight of anticipation pressing down on every person present. Jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes more eagerly. The prosecution, while trying to maintain authority, struggled to downplay the significance of the unusual collaboration. Emma's role became increasingly evident. While she did not speak loudly, her quiet observations guided the court. She noticed which items Rex reacted to most intensely, which witnesses made him tense, and subtle cues that adults would have missed entirely. Her insights, combined with the dog's trained responses, began revealing hidden truths. The tension in the room intensified with each moment, as if the courtroom itself sensed the unfolding revelation. Even the judge seemed captivated. He leaned slightly forward in his seat, tapping the gavel lightly, acknowledging the unusual circumstances. "We will proceed with care," he said, his tone measured, yet with a hint of curiosity. Every adult in the room, from attorneys to jurors, seemed to understand that this was no ordinary testimony. The combination of innocence, instinct, and careful observation was guiding the trial in a direction few could have predicted. As the day progressed, Emma continued to watch, silent yet profoundly perceptive. She pointed subtly at objects, occasionally at people, and each gesture was filled with meaning. Rex responded instinctively, validating her observations in ways that could not be ignored. Witnesses, jurors, and spectators began to whisper in hushed tones, marveling at the unusual alliance between child and dog. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal arguments. It had transformed into a stage for an extraordinary display of intuition and instinct. By late afternoon, it was clear that the first half of the trial had revealed only part of the story. The combination of Rex's instincts and Emma's perceptiveness had already highlighted discrepancies, exposed gaps in witness statements, and suggested connections that adults had missed. Lawyers on both sides adjusted their strategies. Jurors leaned forward eagerly, and reporters scribbled furiously. Everyone realized that the true drama was only beginning. Sarah held Emma close during a brief pause, whispering softly, "You're doing so well, sweetie." Emma looked up, calm and confident, as if to say she had everything under control. Despite her age, she had become the unseen witness, guiding the courtroom toward truths that had otherwise remained hidden. The weight of the day, the tension of the trial, and the unusual collaboration between a toddler and a police dog combined to create a unique and unforgettable atmosphere. As the session drew to a close for the day, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Spectators filed out slowly, jurors whispered to each other, and attorneys conferred quietly. Everyone was aware that something extraordinary had occurred. Emma, seated in the front row, simply watched Rex and the surrounding events with unwavering focus. The courtroom had been captivated, not by loud arguments or dramatic testimony, but by the subtle, profound connection between a child and a dog. The day ended with the knowledge that the trial would resume tomorrow, but the energy and suspense lingered. The spectators, jurors, and courtroom staff all left with a heightened sense of anticipation. Emma had already proven that even the smallest observer could hold tremendous influence. Rex had demonstrated that instinct and training could reveal hidden truths. And the courtroom, now charged with an unusual sense of expectancy, awaited the moment when these two unlikely heroes would uncover the pivotal revelation that could determine the outcome of the case. And so, as the courthouse doors closed for the evening, a sense of quiet suspense hung over the town. The trial had already entered the realm of legend, an unlikely story of a 3-year-old girl, a police dog, and 2 simple words whispered in the morning that had frozen the courtroom in disbelief. Tomorrow promised resolution, revelation, and the extraordinary unfolding of justice in a way no one could have anticipated. The courtroom was tense, charged with an energy that seemed almost electric. Witnesses had been called, evidence had been presented, and the subtle, extraordinary interaction between Emma and Rex had already caught the attention of everyone present. Yet no one had anticipated what would happen next. Emma sat in the front row, her small fingers intertwined with her mother's. Her brown eyes, wide and calm, were fixed on Rex. The dog, alert and intelligent, seemed equally focused on her. Every subtle movement of his body mirrored the unspoken understanding they shared. The judge, aware of the unusual circumstances, leaned forward in his seat, tapping the gavel lightly. "Is there any testimony remaining?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. Lawyers on both sides looked to each other, weighing the significance of what had occurred so far. The defense attorney spoke first, his tone careful but deliberate. "Your Honor, if I may, there is a witness who may have information of extraordinary importance, albeit unconventional in nature. With your permission, we would like to allow her to speak." A hush fell over the courtroom. All eyes turned to Emma, seated quietly with her mother. Sarah felt her heart pound in her chest. She had expected her daughter to remain an observer, but now the weight of attention was shifting toward the toddler. Emma's expression remained calm, her gaze steady. She looked at Rex, and he responded with a subtle wag of his tail, his ears flicking forward as if signaling readiness. The courtroom, a mix of professionals, spectators, and jurors, collectively leaned forward, sensing the impending moment. "Very well," the judge said slowly. "Proceed." His tone was both cautious and intrigued. The attorneys shifted slightly, unsure how to approach a 3-year-old whose observation had already influenced the proceedings. The spectators, sensing something monumental was about to unfold, murmured quietly. Cameras clicked as reporters documented the moment. Everyone realized they were about to witness something unprecedented. Emma's tiny hand rose slowly, pointing toward Rex. Her mother held her other hand gently, whispering, "Go ahead, sweetie. Just tell them what you know." Emma's lips moved carefully, and in a clear, unbroken voice that surprised even her mother, she said 2 words. "He knows." The courtroom froze instantly. Gasps echoed through the room as every adult turned their attention toward the child. Reporters snapped photographs, some holding their breath. Lawyers froze mid-motion, and even the judge lowered his gavel, staring in disbelief. For a moment, the air itself seemed suspended. Those 2 words, so simple, carried a weight that no one could ignore. The implications were immediate. Emma had noticed something crucial, and Rex had responded in kind. Rex's ears perked forward, his eyes locking onto a specific corner of the room where a suspect sat. The dog's body tensed, muscles coiled in alertness, tail held stiffly. Emma's eyes followed his movements, as she nodded ever so slightly, confirming that he had reacted exactly as she had anticipated. The unspoken communication between child and dog was undeniable. The courtroom, once dominated by human authority, now found itself captivated by this extraordinary interaction. The defense attorney seized the moment. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "we believe that this testimony, combined with the police dog's response, may reveal key details relevant to this case. The child's observation cannot be dismissed merely due to her age. Her insight aligns with the dog's training and instincts, and together they provide critical evidence. The prosecution hesitated, struggling to maintain authority. One of the attorneys whispered urgently to the judge, "This is highly unusual, Your Honor, but the child's statement seems to match the dog's reactions. We cannot ignore it entirely." The judge nodded slightly, recognizing that the courtroom was witnessing something beyond the ordinary rules of procedure. Witnesses recalled moments when Rex had reacted strongly to specific items or individuals. Each reaction, combined with Emma's subtle cues, highlighted inconsistencies in previous testimony. The jurors leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. Even skeptical observers found it difficult to dismiss the alignment between the ailing child's observation and the dog's instincts. What seemed like coincidence in the morning now took on profound significance. The audience, too, was captivated. Spectators whispered among themselves, amazed that a toddler could provide such insight. Cameras flashed as reporters documented the historic moment. The courtroom energy had shifted completely. It was no longer solely about legal arguments. It had become a stage for an unusual but powerful collaboration between innocence, instinct, and observation. Rex moved closer to the items on display, sniffing carefully. He paused near a small bag that had been presented as evidence, his body stiffening as his nose twitched. Emma's small finger pointed subtly toward the bag, and her mother felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if the toddler had confirmed the dog's recognition. Jurors exchanged glances, realizing that these two unlikely participants were revealing critical truths that adults had overlooked. The courtroom remained in a tense silence. Lawyers whispered strategies, but their words were drowned out by the collective realization. This was no ordinary trial. Emma, a 3-year-old, had spoken 2 words that stopped everyone in their tracks, words that directed attention to hidden details. The dog, trained and disciplined, responded with instinctive precision. Together, they formed an unspoken team, uncovering evidence that might otherwise have remained unnoticed. Even the judge seemed awed. He tapped the gavel lightly, more as a signal to maintain decorum than to command attention. "The court acknowledges the significance of this statement," he said. "We will proceed with careful consideration of the dog's reactions in conjunction with the child's observation." His tone was measured, but the courtroom could feel the subtle tension. Anticipation for what would happen next was nearly unbearable. Witnesses were guided to repeat portions of their testimony, allowing Rex to respond to objects, locations, and specific individuals. Each time the dog reacted, Emma's subtle gestures confirmed the recognition. The jurors took meticulous notes, realizing that they were witnessing a crucial turning point in the trial. The alignment between the child and the dog was revealing patterns that had been invisible to adults. The courtroom energy was palpable, charged with awe, curiosity, and suspense. Spectators craned forward, some holding their breath as the proceedings continued. Even skeptical observers could not deny the effectiveness of the unusual duo. Emma's calm demeanor and precise gestures, combined with Rex's trained instincts, were reshaping the courtroom's understanding of the case. Every reaction, every movement, and every nod carried significance. The audience felt the weight of the moment, recognizing that justice was being influenced in ways few could have imagined. The defense pressed further, asking the witness to present additional items and provide details about locations and suspects. Rex moved with purpose, sniffing, pausing, and reacting to cues imperceptible to the untrained eye. Emma's tiny gestures guided the observation, confirming or clarifying the dog's instincts. The courtroom remained silent, every adult and juror captivated. The 2 words spoken by a toddler had altered the atmosphere completely, creating a moment of shared tension, curiosity, and revelation. By the end of the session, it was clear that the morning's events had shifted the trial in a profound way. Emma's words, "He knows," had not only frozen the courtroom, but it also illuminated a path toward hidden truths. Rex's responses confirmed her observation, validating insights that adults could have missed entirely. The courtroom had witnessed a rare and extraordinary moment. Innocence and instinct combining to reveal evidence that would shape the case's outcome. As the gavel signaled recess, spectators filed out slowly, murmuring about the toddler who had spoken words that froze a courtroom. Lawyers whispered strategies, jurors discussed their observations, and reporters scribbled feverishly, documenting every detail. Sarah held Emma's hand, pride and awe mixing in her chest. Emma had remained calm, perceptive, and courageous, proving that even the smallest witness could wield remarkable influence. Outside the courtroom, townsfolk discussed the events with wide-eyed fascination. Cameras captured images of Emma and Rex, and news outlets began speculating about the extraordinary duo. The day's proceedings had already entered the realm of local legend. What started as a routine trial had transformed into an unforgettable story of observation, intuition, and the power of unlikely heroes. And so, as the afternoon sun slanted across the courthouse walls, the trial paused for recess, leaving the courtroom, the jurors, the lawyers, and the townspeople with an undeniable sense of anticipation. The true drama was only beginning, and everyone knew that Emma, the 3-year-old with a keen eye, and Rex, the police dog with instinctive precision, would soon reveal the critical pieces of the puzzle that would determine justice. The courtroom was in a state of stunned silence, the echoes of Emma's 2 words, "He knows," still hanging in the air. Spectators, jurors, and even seasoned attorneys struggled to process what they had just witnessed. A 3-year-old had spoken a sentence so simple, yet so powerful, that it had momentarily frozen the room. Rex, the police dog, stood alert, his body tense, ears flicked forward, and eyes sharp. He had responded instinctively to the same cues that Emma had subtly acknowledged. It was a connection so precise that everyone could see the undeniable significance of her observation. The defense attorney was the first to seize the moment, rising from his seat with a mix of caution and determination. "Your Honor," he began, carefully choosing his words, "the court has just witnessed an extraordinary event." The child's statement, in combination with the police dog's reaction, cannot be dismissed. "We request that Rex be allowed to demonstrate his investigative instincts further, so the court may fully understand the relevance of her observation." The judge, intrigued and cautious, leaned forward in his chair. "Very well," he said. "Proceed, but ensure that all actions are conducted in a controlled and safe manner." His tone was professional, yet there was no hiding his fascination. The courtroom murmured, aware that this trial had moved beyond ordinary procedures and into the realm of something unusual, even extraordinary. Rex's handler stepped forward, maintaining calm authority over the dog. "Rex has been trained to detect and identify items, scents, and behaviors associated with criminal activity," he explained. "He will demonstrate his abilities under controlled circumstances." The handler placed a series of objects on a table, each representing evidence tied to the theft case. A small duffel bag, a necklace, a wallet, and a jacket. Rex approached the items with focused precision, sniffing carefully at each one. Emma's gaze followed every movement. Her small fingers twitched slightly, signaling recognition whenever Rex reacted. The jurors leaned forward, notebooks ready, as the dog paused near the duffel bag. He sniffed the item, tensed slightly, and then nudged it with his nose. Emma's eyes lit up, and she nodded subtly. The room erupted in whispers, some skeptical, some astonished. Even the prosecution, trying to maintain composure, could not ignore the undeniable link between the child's observation and the dog's instinctive response. One of the witnesses, a store clerk who had seen a suspect fleeing the scene, was asked to identify objects from the crime. Rex moved toward the jacket on the table, sniffing intently. Emma's finger moved slightly, pointing toward the same jacket. Her mother gasped softly, realizing that her daughter had independently confirmed the dog's identification. The courtroom's energy shifted, the tension now a mix of amazement and anticipation. Every observer sensed that they were witnessing something beyond ordinary procedure. The prosecution attempted to maintain authority, arguing that the dog's actions and the child's gestures were coincidental. "Your Honor, while the child's statement is remarkable," one attorney said, "there is no legal precedent for considering a toddler's observation as formal evidence." The judge nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the point, but not dismissing the significance. "Proceed with caution, but allow the demonstration to continue," he instructed. Rex was guided to another object, a small leather wallet that had been reported stolen. As the dog sniffed and paused, Emma's tiny hand lifted slightly, pointing toward the wallet. She whispered softly to her mother, "He remembers." Sarah's heart pounded. The courtroom had already been captivated by the morning events, but now the child's quiet insight was shaping the perception of evidence itself. The jurors scribbled notes more eagerly, aware that they were observing an unusual but compelling display. Observers began to whisper, speculating about the significance of the moment. "It's incredible," one juror murmured. "A child and a dog. And they're pointing out the evidence that adults might have missed." Cameras clicked as reporters recorded images of the unlikely duo at the center of the courtroom drama. Even seasoned police officers leaned forward in their seats, impressed by the accuracy of the demonstration. The defense attorney took advantage of the momentum, asking Rex to identify specific items associated with different suspects. The dog moved methodically, sniffing each object and reacting to those linked to the crime. Emma's subtle gestures and quiet nods confirmed his responses. The courtroom, once filled with ordinary tension, now experienced an extraordinary sense of revelation. Each reaction from the dog, combined with Emma's validation, highlighted patterns and connections that had gone unnoticed during the initial testimonies. Witnesses were called back to clarify certain details, and each time Rex indicated a relevant object or location, Emma's recognition added credibility. Jurors exchanged glances, increasingly aware that the child's observations and the dog's instincts were not random. The prosecution's attempts to downplay the significance were gradually overwhelmed by the clear alignment between the two. The courtroom's energy was electric. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, jurors scribbled more intensely, and reporters whispered excitedly about the unfolding spectacle. Emma remained calm, observing every action with precision. Her tiny gestures, sometimes a nod, sometimes a finger pointing subtly, guided the interpretation of Rex's reactions. The combination of innocence and instinct had shifted the trial in a direction that no one could have predicted. As the demonstration continued, the defense attorney highlighted inconsistencies in previous witness statements. Items that had been overlooked were now brought to attention, and suspects who had seemed uninvolved now drew attention from both Rex and Emma. The courtroom tension mounted. Adults who had previously dominated the proceedings now found themselves observers of a silent partnership between a toddler and a police dog. By mid-afternoon, it was evident that the trial had entered a pivotal phase. The jurors were captivated, the spectators were enthralled, and even the lawyers were adjusting their strategies in response to the extraordinary events. Emma's 2 words in the morning had frozen the courtroom, but the ongoing demonstration had validated the significance of her observation. The dog's instincts, combined with her perceptiveness, were now providing actionable insights that could influence the outcome of the trial. Sarah watched her daughter closely, a mix of pride and awe coursing through her. Emma had remained calm throughout the intense scrutiny, her quiet confidence guiding the courtroom's attention. The child's insight, paired with Rex's trained responses, had revealed details that adults had missed, and the significance was not lost on anyone. This moment, Sarah realized, would likely be remembered long after the trial concluded. The judge called for a brief pause, allowing everyone to absorb the significance of the demonstration. "We will recess for a short break," he announced, his tone measured. "When we return, we will proceed with testimony informed by the dog's observations." Jurors nodded, spectators murmured, and reporters scribbled furiously. The courtroom's atmosphere was charged with anticipation for what would come next. As the courtroom emptied slightly for the brief recess, whispers and speculation filled the air. Observers marveled at the unusual yet undeniable collaboration between child and dog. "Who would have thought?" one juror murmured. "A toddler and a police dog, changing the outcome of a trial." Cameras captured images of Emma sitting quietly with her mother, Rex lying alert nearby. The extraordinary scene had already begun to take on the aura of legend in the small town. By the time the trial resumed, it was clear that the events of the day had irrevocably shifted the proceedings. Emma's subtle guidance and the dog's instincts had exposed critical details, influenced witness testimonies, and focused the jurors' attention on elements that had previously been overlooked. The courtroom, once a place of ordinary legal procedure, had transformed into a stage for a unique collaboration between innocence and trained instinct. As the afternoon continued, the defense and prosecution carefully navigated the courtroom dynamics. Every reaction of Rex, every gesture from Emma, was now observed, recorded, and analyzed. The trial was no longer just a matter of legal arguments and witness statements. It had become a narrative shaped by the extraordinary partnership of a child and a police dog. The tension, suspense, and engagement of the audience reached unprecedented levels. And so, as Part 5 drew to a close, the courtroom had been irrevocably changed. Emma, a 3-year-old girl, had demonstrated the power of quiet observation. Rex, the police dog, had validated her instincts. The jurors, witnesses, and spectators were all acutely aware that the trial's outcome might hinge on this unlikely duo. The energy in the room was electric, the anticipation palpable, and the story of this extraordinary courtroom moment was already spreading beyond its walls. Tomorrow promised further revelations as the dog's demonstrations and Emma's observations continued to shape the trial. Everyone in the courtroom understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented, a tale of innocence, instinct, and insight that would be remembered for years to come. The courtroom returned from recess, and the energy was thick with anticipation. Spectators whispered in hushed tones, jurors leaned forward in their seats, and reporters scribbled frantically, aware that today's proceedings were unlike any they had ever witnessed. Emma sat quietly in the front row, her small fingers intertwined with her mother's, her wide brown eyes fixed on Rex, the police dog. Alert and disciplined, seemed to sense the heightened tension. His ears flicked forward and tail stiff. The room had become a stage, with Emma and Rex at the center of an extraordinary demonstration. The judge called the court to order, his gavel striking the polished wood. "We will now proceed with further demonstrations," he announced. "The court recognizes the importance of the dog's role and the child's observations. Proceed with care." The room fell into a quiet hum of curiosity. Lawyers shuffled papers, witnesses prepared to testify again, and spectators leaned in, knowing that what was about to happen might change the course of the trial. Rex's handler guided him to the front, where several items linked to the theft case were carefully displayed on a long table. The items included a small duffel bag, a wallet, a necklace, a jacket, and a pair of shoes. Each object had been connected to one of the suspects through evidence collected by law enforcement, though the exact connections had not yet been fully revealed in court. The dog's training allowed him to detect scents, identify objects linked to criminal activity, and even respond to subtle cues from handlers or witnesses. Today, however, his demonstration would take an extraordinary turn. Emma's attention was unwavering. She watched every movement, every subtle shift in Rex's body, every flick of his ears or twitch of his nose. Her mother whispered softly, "Just stay calm, sweetie. Watch and let him do his job." Emma nodded, her small expression serene yet intense. It was as if she understood that the dog's demonstration was more than a procedure. It was a revelation waiting to happen. The handler began the demonstration. "Rex," he commanded gently, "identify." The dog immediately sniffed the first item on the table, the duffel bag. His body tensed slightly, a subtle sign of recognition. Emma's eyes flicked toward the bag, and she gave a tiny nod, confirming the dog's identification. The jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes as they witnessed the alignment between the child's perception and the dog's instincts. The courtroom energy shifted, a mix of awe, curiosity, and anticipation filling the space. Next, Rex moved to the wallet. He sniffed intently, pausing for a moment, then nudged it with his nose. Emma's finger twitched slightly, pointing toward the wallet in silent acknowledgement. Spectators whispered among themselves, amazed that a toddler could validate the reactions of a trained police dog. Even the prosecution, though cautious, had to acknowledge the precision of the demonstration. The courtroom was no longer observing a routine trial. It had become a stage for an extraordinary collaboration between a child and a dog. The handler presented the necklace. Rex sniffed carefully, hesitated, and then barked softly once, a clear signal of recognition. Emma's eyes lit up, and she whispered softly to her mother, "He found it." Sarah's heart raced. The courtroom's attention intensified. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes at a furious pace. And the jurors leaned forward, recognizing that the small gestures and words of a 3-year-old were providing insight that adults had previously missed. The jacket and shoes were next. Rex sniffed, tensed, and nudged each item in turn. Emma's gestures continued to guide the observation, her subtle nods confirming the dog's instinctive responses. The courtroom energy became almost tangible. Witnesses, jurors, attorneys, and spectators alike felt the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary demonstration. It was a revelation, showing the alignment of innocence, perception, and trained instinct. The defense attorney stepped forward, seizing the opportunity. "Your Honor, the child's observation, combined with the dog's instinctive identification, provides critical insight into the connections between the suspects and the stolen items. This demonstration highlights evidence that may have been overlooked or misinterpreted in prior testimonies." His words were measured, but carried the weight of the extraordinary proceedings. The prosecution hesitated, struggling to respond. One of the attorneys whispered to a colleague, "We can't ignore this." The child's recognition aligns perfectly with the dog's instincts. "It's remarkable, but undeniable." The judge nodded slightly, acknowledging the significance of the demonstration while maintaining control of the proceedings. "Proceed with careful consideration," he instructed. "We must observe and evaluate the evidence presented." Rex's handler guided him to a final demonstration. This time, the dog would indicate the presence of the primary suspect linked to the thefts. The suspect, seated quietly in the courtroom, was unaware that the dog's trained instincts and the child's observations would soon converge. Rex approached cautiously, sniffing the air, moving slowly toward the individual. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Every eye followed the dog's movements, every ear attuned to the faint sounds of paws on the floor. Emma's eyes widened slightly, and she whispered softly, "There he is." Her mother's heart pounded. The courtroom froze. Every spectator, juror, and attorney realized the gravity of the moment. A toddler had pointed out the suspect with a quiet certainty that was confirmed by the dog's trained instincts. Rex tensed, stared intently at the individual, and let out a low, assertive bark, a signal that had been trained to indicate recognition. Gasps echoed through the room. Cameras flashed as reporters captured the historic moment. Jurors scribbled notes frantically, recognizing that this demonstration had revealed a direct link between the suspect and the stolen items. The courtroom's energy shifted from curiosity to awe, the tension now palpable. Emma's quiet observation and the dog's instincts had illuminated a truth that had been hidden until now. The judge called for calm, trying to maintain order. "The court acknowledges the significance of this demonstration," he said. "We will proceed with testimony informed by the dog's indications." Lawyers on both sides adjusted their strategies, knowing that the demonstration had introduced a new dynamic into the trial. The alignment between Emma's perception and Rex's instincts had altered the courtroom's understanding of the case. Witnesses were recalled to confirm details of the suspect's activities and to clarify events related to the thefts. Each time, Rex's presence and Emma's subtle guidance highlighted important information, revealing inconsistencies in prior statements and connecting evidence in ways that had previously gone unnoticed. The jurors leaned forward, engrossed in the unfolding narrative. Spectators whispered in amazement, realizing they were witnessing a rare, extraordinary moment of insight and revelation. As the demonstration concluded, the courtroom remained charged with energy. Emma had validated every key identification made by Rex, and the dog had instinctively confirmed her observations. The synergy between the child and the dog had revealed hidden truths, influenced witness testimonies, and focused the jurors' attention on critical evidence. Even seasoned officers and attorneys were visibly impressed by the precision and accuracy of the demonstration. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly, a mixture of pride and awe coursing through her. Her daughter, barely 3 years old, had remained calm, observant, and remarkably perceptive. Together with Rex, she had changed the course of the trial, highlighting details that could determine the outcome of the case. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, a rare convergence of innocence, instinct, and insight that no one could have anticipated. The judge called for a brief recess to allow everyone to absorb the impact of the demonstration. Jurors discussed quietly among themselves, noting the unusual but undeniable alignment between the child and the dog. Lawyers strategized carefully, reporters documented every detail, and spectators whispered in excitement. The trial had been irrevocably transformed. By the end of the session, it was clear that Emma and Rex had not only frozen the courtroom earlier, but had now provided critical guidance and insight. The alignment between her observations and the dog's trained instincts had revealed evidence and patterns that adults had overlooked. The courtroom, once a place of formal legal procedure, had become a stage for a unique collaboration that blended innocence and expertise, perception and instinct. As the day ended, the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Everyone recognized that the trial's outcome could hinge on the extraordinary demonstration they had witnessed. Emma's quiet confidence, paired with Rex's disciplined instincts, had revealed truths hidden from conventional investigation. Spectators left in awe, jurors discussed the impact, and reporters prepared to share the story of a toddler and a police dog who had captivated an entire courtroom. And so, as Part 6 drew to a close, the courtroom remained poised on the edge of revelation. The trial had moved beyond ordinary legal proceedings, shaped now by the subtle but profound collaboration between a 3-year-old girl and a police dog. Tomorrow promised further clarity, resolution, and the dramatic turning point that everyone had been waiting for. The courtroom had grown quiet again after the extraordinary demonstration. The energy that had gripped the room all day lingered like a living presence. Jurors whispered among themselves, their notes filled with observations about the dog's precise reactions and Emma's subtle gestures. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, cameras poised to capture every moment. Everyone knew that what had happened so far was unprecedented, and they waited with bated breath for the next revelation. The judge tapped the gavel lightly. "We will proceed with testimony that may clarify the chain of events leading to the thefts." His tone was measured, but the curiosity in his eyes betrayed him. The courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. The defense attorney rose, speaking with calm authority, carefully framing the next step. "Your Honor, we propose to present additional evidence now, guided by the observations of the child and the dog. Their unique insights have highlighted key inconsistencies in prior statements." The prosecutor shifted in his seat, trying to maintain composure. "Your Honor," he interjected, "while we acknowledge the unusual circumstances, we must proceed with caution. Observations by a toddler, however remarkable, must be corroborated by tangible evidence." The judge nodded, recognizing the balance between legal procedure and the extraordinary developments in the courtroom. "Proceed, but ensure all actions are clearly documented," he instructed. Rex's handler placed a series of items on the table again, each connected to a specific suspect. The dog approached each item with disciplined precision, sniffing, pausing, and signaling recognition. Emma's gaze followed every movement. Her tiny hand pointed subtly whenever Rex indicated a particular object. Her mother felt a mix of pride and awe, realizing that her daughter's quiet insights were influencing every observer in the courtroom. The first revelation came as Rex moved toward the duffel bag containing stolen items. The dog nudged it forcefully with his nose, tensed, and let out a low, controlled bark. Emma's small hand twitched slightly, pointing directly at the bag. Jurors leaned forward, noting the alignment between her subtle gesture and the dog's recognition. Witnesses were called to clarify ownership and connection to the suspect, and discrepancies in their statements began to emerge. The courtroom energy shifted again, curiosity, now intertwined with the first hints of revelation. The next object was a necklace, found near the location of one of the thefts. Rex sniffed carefully, pausing and then signaling recognition. Emma's gaze followed, and she whispered softly, "He knows this one too." Her words, though quiet, carried weight. The jurors exchanged glances, the significance of her observation growing clearer with each passing moment. The prosecution could no longer ignore the alignment between the child's recognition and the dog's instincts. The pivotal moment approached as Rex moved toward the suspect seated in the courtroom. The dog's body stiffened, ears erect, eyes locked on the individual. Emma's small fingers pointed ever so subtly, confirming the dog's focus. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath, every adult aware that the next few seconds could define the trial. Spectators whispered nervously, jurors leaned forward, and even the judge's gavel remained untouched. Rex let out a controlled bark, signaling recognition of the suspect. Emma's voice, soft but clear, repeated the phrase that had frozen the courtroom before. "He knows." Every eye in the room turned toward the suspect, whose composure suddenly faltered. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he realized the alignment between the child's observation and the dog's trained instincts. The courtroom tension became almost unbearable. Everyone could sense that the turning point had arrived. The defense attorney stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, it is evident that the suspect's presence is linked to the stolen items. The combination of the child's observation and the dog's trained instincts provides compelling insight into the events that transpired. We request that the court consider this demonstration as part of the testimonial record." The judge nodded thoughtfully, allowing the statement to be formally noted. Witnesses were recalled to the stand to clarify additional details. Each time, Rex's reactions highlighted inconsistencies or corroborated specific elements of their statements. Emma's subtle gestures validated his responses, providing a bridge between instinct and observation. The jurors took meticulous notes, fully aware that these details could be crucial in determining the trial's outcome. Spectators whispered in amazement, realizing that a toddler and a dog had together revealed critical evidence. The suspect, increasingly aware of the scrutiny, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes darted nervously toward the items on the table, and then toward Rex and Emma. The dog's unwavering focus and the child's quiet validation created an almost inescapable pressure. Even seasoned courtroom professionals noticed the suspect's change in demeanor. The tension was thick, palpable, and impossible to ignore. Emma remained calm throughout. She did not speak loudly or act dramatically, yet her presence alone seemed to influence the room. Her subtle gestures guided the dog, and his instincts confirmed the significance of her observations. The courtroom, now fully engaged, watched as the unlikely duo revealed truths that adults had overlooked. Every subtle movement and reaction carried meaning. Every quiet acknowledgement was amplified by the gravity of the moment. The final piece of the demonstration involved a jacket linked to one of the theft locations. Rex sniffed, tensed, and nudged it decisively. Emma's small hand moved slightly, confirming the dog's recognition. The alignment of instinct and observation was undeniable. The jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes, while spectators whispered in awe. The prosecution, recognizing the weight of the demonstration, began to adjust their approach, carefully considering the implications. The defense attorney summarized the demonstration for the court. "Your Honor, this child's perception, validated by a trained police dog, has revealed critical connections between the suspect and the stolen items. These observations should be considered in evaluating the testimony and evidence presented throughout the trial." The judge nodded, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances while maintaining procedural control. The suspect, now visibly tense, shifted in his seat. He glanced toward Rex, then toward Emma, and finally at the jurors. The weight of the courtroom's attention pressed upon him. He had been confident before, relying on gaps in evidence and testimony, but the extraordinary demonstration had revealed truths he could no longer ignore. The alignment of child and dog had exposed him in a way no conventional investigation had managed. Spectators leaned forward, some holding their breath. Cameras flashed as reporters documented the moment. Jurors whispered quietly, acknowledging the significance of the demonstration. Emma remained calm, her focus unwavering, while Rex stood alert and disciplined. Together, they had created a turning point in the trial, illuminating evidence that might have otherwise remained hidden. The judge called for a brief pause before continuing testimony, recognizing the impact of what had just occurred. Lawyers conferred quietly. Jurors discussed the demonstration, and spectators whispered excitedly. The courtroom had witnessed a rare collaboration of innocence, instinct, and trained skill, resulting in revelations that could determine the outcome of the trial. As the day drew to a close, it was clear that Emma and Rex had irrevocably changed the trajectory of the proceedings. The alignment of a child's observation and a dog's trained instincts had revealed inconsistencies, highlighted connections, and exposed truths that adults had overlooked. The courtroom, once a space dominated by conventional legal procedure, had become a stage for an extraordinary narrative of perception, instinct, and insight. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly, her chest swelling with pride. Her daughter, barely 3 years old, had remained calm and observant throughout the intense scrutiny. Together with Rex, she had provided the courtroom with critical insight, reshaping the investigation in real time. The energy in the room remained charged, anticipation thick, as everyone realized that the trial's outcome now hinged on this unique collaboration. As Part 7 concluded, the courtroom was poised on the brink of final revelation. The extraordinary demonstration had provided clarity, exposed inconsistencies, and placed the suspect under intense scrutiny. Emma and Rex had transformed the trial into an unforgettable display of insight, instinct, and courage. Tomorrow promised the resolution, where justice would finally be served, shaped by the unlikely partnership of a 3-year-old girl and a police dog. The final day of the trial began with a sense of anticipation that was almost palpable. The courtroom was filled with spectators, reporters, and jurors, all aware that the extraordinary events of the previous days had reshaped the proceedings. Emma sat quietly in the front row, her small hand clutching her mother's, while Rex lay alert beside the handler. The energy in the room was tense, charged with the knowledge that today would bring the trial to its resolution. The judge called the court to order, his gavel striking the polished wood with authority. "We will proceed with closing statements," he announced. "The court acknowledges the unique circumstances that have occurred during this trial, including the observations of the child and the demonstrations of the police dog. All parties are expected to proceed with decorum and care." His words carried weight, recognizing the extraordinary nature of the proceedings without compromising the formal process. The prosecution began, attempting to summarize the evidence while addressing the unusual contributions of Emma and Rex. "Your Honor, members of the jury," the attorney said, "while this trial has included unconventional observations, the core evidence remains significant. However, we acknowledge that the demonstrations conducted by the child and the police dog have provided additional context and clarity regarding the suspect's involvement in the thefts." The jurors listened intently, aware that these closing remarks were crucial but had to be weighed against what they had observed firsthand. The defense attorney rose next, his expression calm but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "over the course of this trial, you have witnessed something remarkable. A 3-year-old child, guided by observation and intuition, and a police dog, trained to respond to evidence and instinct. Together, they have revealed connections that may have otherwise remained hidden. We ask you to consider the totality of what you have seen, the alignment of innocence and trained skill, as you deliberate on the evidence and testimony presented." Jurors exchanged glances, their notes filled with observations of Emma's gestures and Rex's precise responses. The extraordinary collaboration had left an indelible mark on their understanding of the case. Spectators whispered quietly among themselves, recognizing that they had witnessed something unprecedented. Even seasoned attorneys acknowledged the challenge of addressing the unconventional but undeniably compelling evidence that had emerged. The judge allowed a final demonstration to clarify critical points. Rex moved among the items of evidence one last time, sniffing each object and signaling recognition. Emma's subtle gestures confirmed the dog's instincts. The alignment between the two was unmistakable. Every juror observed the demonstration with careful attention, recording the significance of each recognition. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, as if sensing that justice itself was about to be illuminated. Witnesses provided closing clarifications. Each statement was carefully weighed against the demonstrations conducted by Rex and validated by Emma's observations. Inconsistencies in prior testimonies were highlighted, and connections between suspects and stolen items were clearly established. The jurors, now fully immersed in the evidence, began to piece together the narrative that had been revealed over several days of extraordinary proceedings. The suspect, seated nervously in the courtroom, had become increasingly aware of the overwhelming weight of evidence against him. His previous confidence had diminished as the alignment between the child's observations and the dog's instincts left little room for doubt. He fidgeted in his seat, glancing repeatedly at the items of evidence, then at Rex, and finally at Emma. The room's tension was almost unbearable, each observer acutely aware of the inevitability of the trial's outcome. Emma, calm and composed, remained focused on Rex throughout the proceedings. Her subtle gestures, nods, and quiet acknowledgments had guided the dog's behavior and reinforced the significance of his instincts. She did not speak loudly, did not draw attention to herself, yet her presence shaped the courtroom's understanding in ways that adults could scarcely articulate. She had become the silent witness, her perception providing insight that had transformed the trial. After all evidence had been reviewed and closing statements delivered, the judge addressed the jury. "Members of the jury," he said, "you have heard the testimonies, observed the demonstrations, and witnessed extraordinary contributions from a young child and a trained police dog. It is now your responsibility to deliberate carefully, consider the evidence in its entirety, and reach a verdict based on the facts and observations presented during this trial." His words were solemn, acknowledging both the uniqueness and the gravity of the proceedings. The jurors retired to deliberate, leaving the courtroom filled with quiet tension. Spectators and reporters speculated about the outcome, aware that they had witnessed a trial unlike any other. Emma remained seated with her mother, her small hand clutching Sarah's as she observed the room with calm curiosity. Rex lay alert, occasionally raising his head to glance toward his handler, aware of the importance of the moment. After several hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom rose in anticipation as the foreperson handed the verdict to the judge. Silence fell, the weight of expectation pressing upon everyone present. The judge read the verdict slowly, each word echoing through the chamber. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of the charges as presented." Gasps and whispers filled the room. The suspect's face paled, and he lowered his head in resignation. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the historic moment. Jurors exchanged glances, some nodding quietly in acknowledgement of the extraordinary process that had led to the verdict. Emma, seated calmly in the front row, gave a small, satisfied nod. Her observations, combined with Rex's instincts, had played a pivotal role in uncovering the truth and ensuring justice was served. The judge addressed the courtroom. "This trial has been remarkable, not only for the evidence presented, but for the unique contributions of a young observer and a trained police dog. The court commends their role in aiding the discovery of truth." Spectators applauded quietly, recognizing the extraordinary collaboration that had shaped the trial's outcome. Outside the courtroom, the story spread rapidly. Reporters documented every detail, from Emma's 2 words that froze the courtroom to Rex's precise demonstration of evidence recognition. Townspeople gathered to witness the aftermath, celebrating the unlikely heroes who had captured the community's imagination. Emma and Rex had become local legends, their story inspiring awe, admiration, and a renewed sense of belief in the extraordinary power of observation and instinct. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, pride and relief mingling in her chest. "You did it, sweetie," she whispered. Emma's eyes sparkled with quiet satisfaction. Though she was only 3 years old, she had shown the power of observation, courage, and calm determination. Together with Rex, she had helped reveal the truth and secure justice in a case that could have otherwise remained unresolved. The police officers involved in the case praised Rex for his extraordinary training and instincts, acknowledging the critical role he had played in the courtroom. The collaboration between the child and the dog became a case study for law enforcement and legal professionals alike, demonstrating the unique potential of unconventional methods in uncovering hidden truths. As the sun set over the courthouse, the extraordinary trial came to a close. Emma and Rex had proven that even the smallest observer and the most unlikely partnership could wield profound influence. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, the alignment of innocence, instinct, and evidence, culminating in a moment of justice that would be remembered for years to come. In the days that followed, Emma's story spread nationwide. News outlets celebrated the remarkable duo, highlighting the child's courage and perception, as well as Rex's discipline and instinct. The trial became a legendary example of how truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources, capturing the hearts and imaginations of people across the country. Emma, still just a toddler, continued to grow with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the impact of observation and courage firsthand. Rex, the faithful police dog, remained by her side, a living testament to the extraordinary possibilities of partnership between humans and animals. Together, they had changed the course of a trial, ensuring that justice prevailed and leaving a lasting legacy that would inspire generations. And so, the story concluded not with dramatic fanfare, but with the quiet triumph of truth, observation, and unwavering courage. Emma's 2 words, whispered softly in a tense courtroom, had frozen time, guided a police dog, and ultimately shaped the outcome of a case that might otherwise have remained unresolved. The courtroom, the community, and the nation had witnessed something extraordinary. The extraordinary power of a child's perception and a dog's instinct in the pursuit of justice.